Hey guys, welcome to the next part of the series. Today we're going to continue with the cloth properties. So this is where we left off, just a quick overview of the interface. Now it's time that we talk about how the work works, or how the cloth works here inside of Marvelous Designer. Okay, so first of all, as you can see right here, this is a very common issue. This happens when the cloth is not like calculating properly. Now this could be due to one thing. Remember that I changed the simulation properties. Whoop. Simulation properties to use GPU. I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to let this use the CPU. The CPU tends to be more exact while the GPU tends to be faster. So depending on the kind of like approach that you want to have for your own garment creation, you might want to use one or the other. So how does this work? Well, the way Marvelous Designer works, by the way, there's another sister program called Cloud 3D, which is a little bit more geared towards people that are doing this for production, like for actual production of the garments in real life. In our case, this is perfect for VFX. And in both of the softwares, the way this works is by using this thing called the mesh, right? So the patterns that we create here get triangulated, very similar to the decimation process inside of ZBrush. They get triangulated, and those are the triangles that get simulated. The inner workings of the software simulate this thing to create the folds, the wrinkles, and all of the different things that we normally see here inside of Marvelous Designer. And the way we're going to control this is by using this thing called particle distance. Now, keep in mind that this particle distance is set in millimeters. That's why it was very important for us to set this proper measurement. And what this means is that there's going to be 2 centimeters, okay? The triangles are going to be 2 centimeters from each other. So 20 millimeters, of course, is 2 centimeters. If we want more definition on our mesh, we're going to decrease this number. This is a little bit like, I know it's a little bit like ironic. Most of the times when we want more, well, we increase the number. In this case, we need to reduce the number. So if we go all the way down to 10, for instance, what's going to happen is now we're going to have triangles with only 1 centimeter of distance. But see what happened here? I only got the change on this particular patterns right here because these were the ones that were selected. And as you can see, there's a little blue line right there. That means that they're linked together. So whatever happens to one of them is going to happen to the other one. And here, well, as you can see, I changed the resolution down to 10, and it only affected the patterns that I had selected. If I want all of the patterns to be affected, then of course I need to select all of the patterns and lower this down to, again, something like a 10. There we go. Now, of course, the more triangles, the more computing that our computer is going to have to do, and sometimes the slower the simulation is going to run. So if I run now, you can see that, yes, I can get way more wrinkles. As you can see there, way more folds and stuff, but it's definitely taking a little bit longer. Usually the way we work when we're working with garments is we start with a low particle distance, or in this case, a high particle distance, having like big triangles. And as we are refining more and more, then we get into lower and lower numbers. However, this has a little exception. If you're working on things that are really small, like, I don't know, let's say we want to create just a piece of fabric, like a small piece of fabric that's like this long. It could be like a ribbon piece or something. And I want this thing to simulate on the shoulder of the character, right? Just laying there. Well, the problem is this thing has the particle distance set to 20, and it's such a small object that if I take a look at the wireframe here, here, you're gonna see that we have very few triangles. And when we simulate, yes, this thing is gonna flow on top of the character, but it's not really gonna give us something that we would expect to see from a ribbon or something, because there's not enough detail. So for small pieces, you can actually go really small, like 3, for instance, and then you can see that we get super fine detail, and that's gonna allow us to get a little bit more details and effects out of this little piece right here. So when you're working with really big pieces, you can have a larger particle distance, and when you're working with little small pieces like this one, you can have a lower particle distance. That's usually the way to go. Otherwise, just lower the particle distance at the very end of the garment production so that things flow in a better way. Okay? Now, other than that, there's a couple of things that fabrics have, all patterns have. Here, let's go texture, that are going to dictate how they simulate. So if I select everything right here, you can see that other than the particle distance, we also have this thing called shrinkage weft and shrinkage warp. This has to do a little bit with cloth. So if you take a look at the cloth surface, like any cloth surface, we know that most textiles are different types of fabrics or different types of filaments that are like sewn together or knitted together to get an interesting thing, right? So we have nylon, which is plastic. We have cotton, which is made out of, well, cotton. We have wool. And the cloth, like the fibers of the cloth, have the tendency to either shrink or relax, depending on the type of property or the type of material that we're using. So the waft and the warp are a property of the cloth that's going to try to either shrink it or let it just like go out. So if you want to have like a really form-fitted cloth, you're probably going to lower, in this case, the shrinkage weft. Now, the way I remember this as warp, as in, Star Trek, like beam me up, Scotty, stuff like that. So warp, you go up and down, and then weft kind of sounds like left, so it's left and right. So shrinkage weft is going to move the like tension or the stretchity of the cloth from left to right, and warp is going to go from top to bottom. So you're going to see if I lower this to like, say, 50, and I simulate, the cloth is going to become like shorter, like a top skin. See how this gives me this very interesting effect, which might be something that you're going for in your garment, but of course 50 is way, way, way too much. So let's set this at 90. And this other one will do the exact same thing. I'm going to exaggerate it again, but it's going to do it from left to right. So as you can see, it becomes very like skin tight. So if you're doing some sort of like leggings or like, I don't know, some sort of like a diving suit or something where you want things to be really, really close to the body, then consider using shrinkage weft to really like bring it in towards the body, or shrinkage warp if you want to create this sort of like up and down variation. So those are two properties that we can change here on the fabric. Now this thing right here that we're changing are affecting this thing, the fabric number 1, okay? If I were to add a new fabric by just clicking this add button, you're gonna see that this add fabric also has parameters, especially over here, like on the physical properties. We also have stretch warp, stretch weft, and a lot of other things, bending warp, bending warp, shear, etc., etc., etc. Now, right now, I don't wanna focus on those ones. Let me right click and delete this one. I want to focus on the basic ones. And again, these are the pattern specific things, the pattern specific elements that we have here. Then the fabric itself will have its own little elements. So by combining both of them, you're going to achieve different results. In this case, let me just Control C to bring this thing back to like 100. So let's say 100. When you see red number in here, that means that the attribute is different. So that means that you might have 100 here, but some other piece has a different number. Very easy way to know whether things are all equal or not. Of course, there's going to be parameters like the name and stuff that are not going to have the same attribute, but most of the times, especially if you're doing like a piece of the same fabric, everything should be pretty similar. Now, as I mentioned, we have this fabrics up here, and these fabrics have things such as the color. So if we want to have like a red t-shirt or like a blue t-shirt, you can change the red here. We'll talk about textures and materials later on a little bit more. And we also have something called the presets. So, for instance, denim, the things that jeans are usually made out of, it's a lot stiffer and it's a lot like harsher than, for instance, cotton or silk. So those properties would be very difficult for a like normal artist to figure out and find like the perfect example. And that's why, thankfully, we have presets. So if I were to create a new fabric right here, you're going to see that down here on the physical properties, we have all of these presets. So normally, all of these presets are the materials that you download, such as this one, like this rip. Remember that we downloaded this one on the last session? We have this leather, we have this knit, and you can always go back or up here into the fabric section. And for instance, if I type in denim, and I double click an element, this object will be added to my fabric tab. Remember, if you don't have your fabric tab, you can go here and just like check it out. And this one, you just like place it exactly where it's supposed to be. Like just drag and drop it on the particular asset that you're working with. And you're going to say now we have a denim made shirt. So now if we simulate, the denim is going to behave slightly different than, let's say, silk, for instance. So let's go for silk now. And let's just double click the silk, which again, we're going to add right here. You can also just grab everything and just assign, here, just grab everything here. Select the material and just hit assign. There we go. So now everything has the, sorry. That's using the same fabric. So let me delete this one. Let's go to the silk. Let's change the color. There we go. And now let's just drag and drop. Hey, change the color. There we go. So a nice red silk. Perfect. So now we have the silk. And if we simulate, as you can see, the silk will be a lot smoother, will get more wrinkles, and will get a different sort of behavior because the physical properties of the cloth will be slightly different. And that's pretty much the basics of the clothing system, like the property settings. However, and this is one of the things that I like, and at the same time I find really challenging about the software. The software is rather easy to use. I'm going to create a new scene right here. The software is rather easy to use. There's not a lot of things or a lot of tools that are inside the element. But the problem is not the tools themselves. The problem is that we actually need to learn things about like how to be a proper tailor to really utilize and maximize the use of all of these tools that we have right here. It's not just about like going here and creating patterns and that's it. There's a lot of things that go into it. So I'm going to go into avatar first, and I'm going to say delete out all avatars, and we're going to talk about patterns now. Here on the 2D pattern window, we can create patterns, and there's only 3 ways to create patterns inside of Marble Designer: a polygon pattern, a rectangle pattern, an ellipse, or create patterns out of other patterns. Okay, so the polygon pattern, as you might imagine, is just you click several points in space, and depending where you click, you're gonna create this shape right here. Now remember, the measurements that you see here are in millimeters. So if I create, for instance, this line right here, which is 2,326 millimeters, that would be 2 meters and 32 centimeters. Okay, just move the decimal point once towards the left, and that's going to be your measurement in centimeters. So be very mindful, because remember, the bigger the cloth, the more triangles, the more computational power you're going to require. Now, you can press backspace. If you're drawing points and then you miss one point, or you draw something that you don't like, you can just press backspace, and that's going to delete the last point that you created. Do not do Control-C. I do Control-C very often because I'm used to other softwares, and that's going to remove everything, so be careful with that one. Then we have the rectangle polygon with, again, very simple. You just drag and drop, and that's going to create a rectangle. Very easy, very, very simple. Now, if you click instead of drawing dragging, you're going to have this option to create a specific size rectangle, which you can select here, the width and the height. You can actually like create several of them, as you can see here, the interval and the angle. So if, for instance, I say, hey, I want like 4 or 5 of them, look at that. We get like several at the same time. So that's a little bit more useful for pattern and stuff, but for now, just like drag and drop and right click to create 2 different types of polygons. Sorry, normal click. It's just normal click. Hit cancel. The other one is the ellipse, and very similar. You can press and drag to create an ellipse. If you press shift, it's going to be a perfect circle. Very, very important. Those points that you're seeing right there, those are the sections. So you're getting like the number of each individual section. And the other thing, of course, if you can just click again, and you can select either diameter or radius. So if you know exactly how big you need your pattern to be, you can just input it here on the creation process. Now, in the world of or in the polygon tool here, there's one more thing that's very, very important. Actually, this is going to be the first exercise for this video. In this one, you can't just, you can just add points, but patterns are usually not like super harsh. Sometimes you're going to have some nice curves. So how do you create a curve? By clicking and dragging. If you click and drag, you're going to create a curvature. You can also press Control and just Control and click and drag. That's another way to do it. However, as you can see, it's slightly different. If you do Control, you're not gonna get like the Bezier curve. And if you click and drag, you're gonna get this sort of Bezier curve. So if you're a little bit more used to working with vectors, you might want to use this one because you get the splines or the little handles. If you don't want to work with those handles and you just want to work with normal curvatures, just click Control and just drag. So just very similar. Sometimes for certain things, I prefer the handles, and for other things, I prefer this one, especially because sometimes you're going to go into the edit curve point, and when you have the handles, it becomes a little bit difficult to manage, and in this case, it's just a little bit easier. You just like move the point where you want, and the curve is going to behave closer to what you expect. Okay, so now we're going to do a little exercise, and again, as I mentioned, this is going to be one of the first like garments that you're going to be creating, which is not a garment itself. It's actually a heart-shaped pillow. At the time of this recording, we are kind of close to when Valentine happens, so I thought it would be a cool idea. So in the world of tailoring, there's a lot of things that are called patterns, right? Patterns are just a way to get an idea of what cuts you need to create a specific garment. Now, we're going to talk about like patterns a little bit more in depth later on, because there's a lot of information here that we need to process. But one thing I just want to make sure that you understand, this works for the real world. In the digital world, we really don't need patterns as much. Think of them more as a reference rather than as a hard, like written down rule or something. They're more like an idea of what you need to do. And to import a pattern right here, it's very simple. I'm just gonna right click and we're gonna say to add background image. I'm gonna go here. You're gonna look for the file. In this case, I want you to go into chapter 1 and you're gonna find this heart shape image. I'm just gonna hit open. Now, don't say okay yet because we need to adjust things here. Each square that you see here, I believe that's 10 millimeters, so that would be like 1 centimeter. So this is way, way too small. So I'm gonna change the scale to something like 400 to make this thing a little bit bigger. So now, more like a cushion size. You can change the opacity if you want to see it like very, very faintly or like super hard. You can change this around here. You can change the rotation. And once you're done, you hit OK. Now, unlike other softwares, once this is in here, you can't move it. You're going to have to right click again, go back to add background image, and then you can move it around or change the rotation or the scale or whatever you want. But there's no like gizmo or option to change it once it's there. You have to access this background image menu. If you want to clear it or change the image plane, you're just going to hit reset. Unfortunately, we cannot add more than one image. So yeah, just be mindful of that. You can create, of course, a collage in Photoshop or any other imaging processing software and import it, but for now, it's just one image. So hit OK, and there we go. So we're going to trace the heart right here, right? So we're going to go to our polygon tool, and I'm going to start down here in this case. So I'm going to start down. I'm going to press Control, and just give it a couple of clicks. I'm pressing Control. Control is being pressed at this point. And I'm just going to give it a couple of clicks while we go throughout the curvature. Once we hit the middle point, then I'm just going to go, instead of hitting Control, oh, that's my bad habit of doing, what's the word, of doing Control-C to go back. So Control. Once I'm about to get there, I'm not going to press Control. I'm just going to do one normal click because I want the final point to be sharp. Okay. So remember, when you do not press Control or drag, you're going to create a sharp point. And in this case, that's what we want. So yeah, there we go. Now, one of the big questions, how do we create the other half, right? Because we're doing this because we want to save time. We want to make sure that we don't have, or we're not spending any more time than we need. So to copy this or to mirror this, there's actually 3 different ways. The first one is just right-clicking, copy, right-clicking, or just Control-V, Control-C, Control-B, and you're going to get this, right? Unfortunately, this is not the proper way. Yes, we could like flip it, but it's not going to be exact. So what you want to do is just Control-C, and then there's mirror paste with the shortcut is Control-R. And it's going to mirror paste this, Control-C, and then Control-R. And it's going to mirror paste this to the other side. Then we can sew these 2 pieces together using the sewing tool, segment sewing, and just connect from one side to the other. We'll talk about the sewing tool a little bit more very shortly. So that will give us our heart-shaped pattern. If we simulate, you can see that we get this, just a flappy little thing here in the heart of a shape, in the form of shape of in the shape of a heart. Sorry. So yeah, I mean that's looking like something, but not really what we want, right? Like I don't really want to have a seam right here. Normally, if I were doing this in real life, I would have the full thing. So the easiest way to mirror a shape is to go here into the Edit Pattern options, select the inner line, right click, and select this option called Unfold. Unfold is pretty much like mirror. So we just unfold, and we're gonna get the same shape on the other side. The disadvantage of doing this is that even though this is mirror, it does not share any sort of like symmetry. So if I were to change, for instance, this point right here, it's not changing over here. One thing we can do to avoid that though is go again into Edit Pattern, right click and say Unfold Symmetric Editing, okay? So now, as you can see, we create a seam line down the middle, and if I want to change a point in a specific part of my garment, let's go here to Edit Curve Point, for instance, it will change on both sides. Super, super, super helpful because usually we're going to be making changes to one side of the character and we don't want to do them all over again or rebuild or restitch things together. So we're going to have a lot of like what's the word? Duplicate editing or just like connected editing. So when you move one side, the other will move. And it doesn't matter which one you move, they're connected. So super, super helpful for us. And there we go. We have created our first pattern. Let me just check how we're doing on time. Okay, we're running a little bit high on time, so I'm just gonna do a quick little thing here, and then on the next video, we'll continue with the details for this, with this heart-shaped cushion. So this is not a cushion, right? This is just a normal, like, flat thing. So I'm gonna reset the 2D arrangement by clicking this button right here so that we're back to this element. And I'm gonna show you something real cool. When we want to add thickness to an object, we need to add something called a clone over or clone under option. So if you select both patterns, right click, we have this option right here, which is called layer clone over or layer clone under. And what this will do is, as the name implies, it will it will clone the object, it will clone the symmetry, but not only that, it will also stitch them together. So if I were to grab this pattern, for instance, and move it forward, you're gonna see that all of the border of my pattern is already stitched together. Now, if I simulate, nothing's gonna happen. You saw there that it kind of looked like a cushion, right? It started looking like something, but then we get this super horrible thing. Why is this happening? Well, because Marvelous doesn't know that we want this thing to be filled with something, right? And the best way to fill an object here inside of Marvelous is using something called pressure. So we're going to talk about pressure again more throughout this course and throughout these videos. But pressure is just like a positive or negative force that we can add to the garments. And when patterns have pressure and the pressures are opposite on two sides of the pattern, we're going to create a sort of vacuum, right? And that vacuum is going to give us volume, which is going to be super, super helpful. So I'm going to select this one right here, which is the top element. Let's reset this real quick. Let's grab this guy. So just click and just drag, click and drag. There we go. So I'm going to select this positive pattern right here, the one that's on the front and on the top. And then down here, I'm going to select the pressure. I'm going to say something like 5, positive 5. And then this one is going to have a pressure of negative 5. The pressure is going to push the cloth to the direction, to the X direction, to their normal direction, so their front-facing element. And depending on the pressure, it's either going to push it forward, in this case to this side for this one, or backwards, in this case, like over there. So now, when we simulate, look at this. Bloop. We get this very, very nice cushion. Now, this would be the inside of the cushion. We don't have the nice, like, fluffy, comfortable, like, cover for the cushion, but this is looking quite nice. So, again, we're going to be using pressure quite a bit. You can make this super intense. So, for instance, let's stop the simulation. If I say that the pressure is going to be a 10, and then I say that the pressure for this one is going to be a minus 10, and then I simulate, it's going to be, like, bloop, super, like, inflated because there's a lot of pressure in the inside of the object. Now, super important, whenever you're using pressure, you want to make sure that the pressure is the same, or I mean opposite, but in the same amount for both sides, because if you change this just slightly, maybe if this is like 11, what's going to happen is this thing's going to start like kind of like floating around, and especially with lower numbers you see this a little bit more because there's going to be more pressure on one side than the other. So you always want to keep the same pressure on both sides. And yeah, that's it, guys. I'm going to stop the video right here. In the next one, we're going to finish this garment, and I'm going to be talking about other like basic principles of a cloth. So hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next one. Bye-bye.